Hi guys, I hope you all had an enjoyable Easter break. It feels a bit strange not coming back to college after an Easter break, but we can get back into the routine of school and doing these online sessions to make sure that you are brilliant at stuff when we all do go back. Okay, so I've decided to set it up a little bit differently this time. Rather than setting one session a day, I'm going to set 4 at the beginning of the week that are all thematically linked as a sequence. The idea is that you still do them one a day. So not that you sit and try and get through 4 sessions in one go, but that those of you who are managing your own timetable can choose when you do each session. Those sessions are designed to take about 30 minutes. They might take you up to an hour, but I've tried not to overload you because I want you to have time in your day to do fun stuff as well. All of them are going to be revisiting things you've learnt before, not trying to teach you something new. The sessions this week are all going to be about the theme of power and how power is presented in Macbeth. You've all learnt Macbeth, so it'll just be sort of using what you've learnt in a slight different way. And at the end of the week, there'll be a quiz on Show My Homework. It is really important that you do that because that's our best way as teachers of assessing you. We can't look at all the work you produce, but what we can do is create questions that allow us to make inferences about what you've learned and what you've understood. And it gives us a chance to give you kudos points and tell you how great you are, okay? So please complete the 4 sessions across the week, ideally when you would have had English anyway, but that's not essential. And please complete the quiz on Show My Homework at the end of the week. Okay, so the sessions will all seek to create kind of a narrative across the week. So session 1 is the exposition, which basically means revisiting some background knowledge, going back over things you will have learnt before, but making sure you know it. Session 2, the application, will be about looking at how we could take that knowledge and apply it to an exam question. Session 3, development, taking that knowledge and developing it and applying it in more sophisticated ways. And then lastly, the consolidation, which will be more independent. The sessions will be less of me talking as the sessions progress and more of you doing, so that it's me setting up and then you practicing and then having to go by yourself at the end. So straight into session 1 for this week then. So the knowledge setting task. We're going to try and answer the big question, what is power and how does Shakespeare present ideas about power in Macbeth? Okay, so the idea is by the end of this session, you will be able to answer that and you will feel that you've revisited the content enough to know that. First of all then, in terms of what is power, if we go to the dictionary, there's 2 definitions that are most relevant of power. The first one, the ability to do something or act in a particular way. So in that sense, we all have power. You have the power to decide whether to do these sessions and to, keep practicing so that when you get back to school, you'll know lots of stuff. So we all have that kind of power and that capacity over our own lives in a sense. The second one, the ability to direct or influence the behaviour of others or the course of events, is in many ways a bit more interesting for Macbeth, I think. And thinking about power in terms of which characters influence others, which characters influence what happens in the play, is when we can really get into the nitty-gritty of Macbeth. Also in relation to power, it's really important to remember that the period in which Shakespeare lived and set this play had a really strong hierarchical social order. Now, hierarchy just means a society which is ranked according to power or status. So we still have that to an extent today, but not in the way it was in Shakespearean England. That kind of hierarchical structure was really important. Your power or status defined your position in society. And on the right of the screen, you can see there's a little diagram that kind of shows that. And obviously the monarch, the king or the queen, the king in the case of by the time Macbeth was written, is right at the top. His status and power is unparalleled by anyone else. Below him, we've obviously got the nobility, dukes, duchesses, thanes in the case of Macbeth, the gentry, the wealthy people who own land, merchants, yeomen and others. So really clear sense that your status and your position in society was defined by your wealth and your position. Okay, so let's apply this to a little task then. Using what you know about hierarchical structure of Shakespearean England and the idea of status and position, all I'd like you to decide is for each of the characters, by the standards of the age, which one has high status and which one has low status. And I've set this up as a kind of little battery activity. So the idea being the green battery is obviously full power. So a character who you think by the standards of the age would have a lot of power in society, put them at the green battery. And obviously it decreases. So you can put the characters' names next to whether you think they've got loads of power, less power, a moderate amount, or very little power. If that's just confusing you, just rank order the character names from most to least powerful based on social hierarchy. Okay? So if you could... Okay, before we look at some answers, I'd like you to now do the same task, but with a slightly different focus. Again, I'd like you to rank the characters, but this time I'd like you to rank them, not in terms of their status within the social hierarchy, but in terms of their influence over the events of the play. So if you think a character has a lot of influence over the events of the play, i.e. the things that happen in the play, then you would put them on the green battery here. If you think a character has some influence over events of the play, but not as much, then orange. And obviously if they have no power, they have no influence over what happens in the play, they can go at the end here. So again, we're still ranking them, but not in terms of their social power, but in terms of how much power they have in the play. Again, if you find the battery thing confusing, just rank them from most control, most influence over what happens, and down to least. So if you could pause the video and do that, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, so I've done this activity at the same time as you, and this is my list. Hopefully yours looks reasonably similar. You can see across the top of the battery, I've put the characters that would have social status by the standards of the age, and then along the bottom of the batteries, the characters who have influence over actions in the play. So fairly obviously, in terms of the social status, the hierarchy, King Duncan is the main man. He's the green battery, isn't he? He's got maximum power. He's the monarch, he's at the top of the tree. On the yellow, I've put Malcolm and Macbeth. Malcolm, the son of the king, Macbeth, a thane. They're really important. Macduff and Banquo, they're not as influential necessarily as Malcolm and Macbeth, because Malcolm is obviously second in line to the throne and Macbeth is third in line. So that's why I've put Macduff and Banquo slightly lower. Then we've got Lady Macbeth. Now, Lady Macbeth is down here on the red, because although the wife of a thane, she is a woman. And obviously you will have learnt with your English teacher about what we call the patriarchal structure of society. Patriarchal meaning a society in which men have power and control. And I'm sure you will have learnt about the fact that women had very little legal power. They didn't have power to own things in their own right. So Lady Macbeth is pretty powerless by the standards of the age, because of that hierarchical structure and because of the patriarchal structure of society. And then right at the bottom, we've got the witches, the lowest of the low, really, by the standards of the age and James I's impression. These were often, people persecuted as witches were often not only women, but poverty-stricken old women, unmarried women often. So really, in terms of the social status, they were considered very lowly. Now, of course, what's interesting is when we look at the bottom of the battery and we consider how much influence characters have over the actions in the play. Now, I've put Macbeth on green because Macbeth makes everything happen, doesn't he? Macbeth is the one who does stuff. On yellow, then, I've put Lady Macbeth and the witches because they are catalysts, aren't they? They do play a role in his journey. They don't actually do the things themselves, but they are pretty powerful in their influence over him. Macduff and Malcolm I've put next because obviously they have influence over what happens at the end, the death of Macbeth and the final outcome. Banquo doesn't seem to have much control or influence. And then King Duncan at the bottom because, I mean, he dies at the end of Act 1, doesn't he? So, and he doesn't have a clue what's going on, doesn't even realise that they're all trying to murder him. So, bad times for Duncan. But the reason this is interesting is because what we can see here is what we call the subversion of social order. Social order, hugely important in Jacobean England, and what we see in Macbeth is a world in which power structures are disassembled. They're completely changed from the usual way of doing things. What I'd like you to consider is, does Shakespeare suggest that A, the subversion of power structures is good for society and individuals, or B, that the subversion of power structures has terrible consequences for society. Okay, hopefully you all recognise B, and this is the big idea of the play, isn't it? Shakespeare doesn't just subvert, doesn't just change the power structures, he doesn't just kind of undermine things, but he shows that it's devastating for the individual, for society, that only someone who is the ordained by God, who is the rightful king, is fit to hold power. And we'll look at how that big idea is developed as we progress through these sessions. Okay, the next thing I'd like to do then in this session is to think about how power changes. We've identified that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth within this play are the two of the most powerful characters in the sense that they have the most influence over what happens in the majority of the play. But actually we see their power levels changing, filling and dropping at different points. So again, all I'd like to do, please, is to pause the video and to add to this table, you can draw out the table if you want to, or you can just make some notes. When does Macbeth have power? What does he do? At what moments in the play could we say Macbeth has a lot of power? And same for Lady Macbeth. And then opposite to that, when do they lack power? At what moments in the play would you say Macbeth has very little power or becomes powerless due to his own choices? And then the same for Lady Macbeth. So please pause the video, spend 10 minutes filling in the table. Okay, well done, guys. Hopefully you did, manage that. Okay, so hopefully you found that quite straightforward. If we go through together a few pointers, I would say Macbeth, he has a lot of power at the beginning, doesn't he? When he defeats MacDonald's army, he's not only physically powerful and a commanding presence, he is also powerful in the sense that he's so respected. The king thinks that he is wonderful for this victory. The other men are in awe of him and respect him. So he's got power in so many ways, which are about his status and his level of respect, as well as his physical domination. Of course, his power starts to wane very early in a sense. He gets more powerful after killing King Duncan because he is the king. So he's got so much authority and power. However, internally, Macbeth's power decreases because he becomes full of self-doubt. He loses a sense of who he is. He feels guilty. He feels fearful all the time. So it's really interesting with Macbeth that his power externally, in terms of his status, peaks at the same time as his internal power, his sense of self and identity absolutely drops. Now, of course, Lady Macbeth, we see her being powerful in a different way. She has a lot of power when she persuades Macbeth to do it, possibly even more immediately after he's done it. If you think of the scene where he comes back from the murders, he's messed up the plan, he hasn't left the daggers behind, and she goes off to take control and authority and to sort things out. He is at a moment of complete collapse. She is at a moment of empowerment, and she seems to be able to hold it together. But of course, because her destiny or her life is so intrinsically linked to her husband, it can't last. So as his power diminishes and collapses, so does her. Culminating in, of course, in Act 5, the sleepwalking scene, where we see her completely out of control and losing any sense of who she is and her own sense of powerfulness. She tries to maintain power and control over Macbeth, doesn't she, in Acts 3 and 4, but his increasingly tyrannical acts eat away at her. So both of these characters are really interesting because their external power increases, their status in society, but at the same time their actual power falls away from them. Okay, that's the end of this first video. We've got a second one coming up where we'll look at more specific lines that are to do with power and think about how power is presented in those.